Right now, you're seeing something that seemed impossible just a few months ago. It's new gameplay from Hytale, and footage revealed because they are finally breaking the curse of basically the game being unlaunched and there not being footage. And this may seem shocking to you if you've not seen the news yet. And it's a game with a wild story. It generated 61 million views on its announcement trailer in 2018. That showed so much potential that Riot picked it up, and of course it's the very same game that Riot then went on to cancel this summer after nearly 10 years of development. But thanks to diehard fans and former creators who just refused to give up, that is not where the story is ending. You're not just going to see footage, you're actually going to be playing it, and very soon. But to understand why this matters, what's going on, and in what form this game is returning to us, you need to understand how Hytale died. June's cancellation of Hytale shocked everyone. This Minecraft spiritual successor had been in development for nearly a decade when Riot pulled the funding and ended the project. All of that work was going to be lost. It was a heartbreaking conclusion for a project that many people believed in deeply. And I really do mean that. You had people starting entire YouTube channels and content ecosystems around this game, so for it to just die was honestly horrible. But to understand what's happening today, you need to see how the cancellation alone wasn't the thing that made this whole situation dire. You see, it's not like Riot just changed their mind and killed it. In a way, Hypixel had kind of done this to itself. Basically, 4 years before the game was cancelled, leadership greenlit a full engine rewrite, moving from Java and C# to C++ with an external contractor. And the goal with this sort of made sense, at least for a Riot-owned studio. They wanted Riot quality polish and cross-platform support, but the result of that was years upon years of rebuilding systems that already worked. From what I've come to understand, the rewrite was extremely controversial internally. We know that staff were leaving in waves, and ultimately costs exploded to over $38 million in losses in just 2023 alone. Now, in the aftermath of all of this falling, we asked a simple question: can Hytale be saved? Of course, we weren't sure. The costs were high, the technical status was a complete mess, and it would need massive commitments from investors. Plus, it would all hinge on Riot just giving up the IP, letting it go out of their vault. Remember, Riot had invested more than $50 million in operating costs over 5 years, and that's not counting what they paid to acquire the studio. So the chances seemed dire, and that's why, as of last week, the news of Hytale being saved is absolutely incredible. And the good news is that to understand how it's being saved and the game that you'll actually be able to play soon, well, you needed to know this backstory. You needed to know about the rewrite. So, now that you understand that, let's get into the return of Hytale. I need you to wait a second though, because I need to fill your Christmas stocking. And today's sponsor, Ugreen, have actually got the perfect goddamn tech upgrades sorted to actually do that. First, take a look at these, right? These are their fine tracker tags, and they are properly clever. They're basically better than AirTags in every practical way. The battery lasts 2 years and it's replaceable, which means no e-waste, no built-in obsolescence. It just uses those simple little flat disk batteries that cost basically nothing. And the 80 decibel alarm means they're actually loud enough to really find things. They work perfectly with Apple's Find My network. They're literally cheaper per unit than Apple's offering, and honestly, a lot more functional. Even just little things like, you know, being able to use a lanyard to put it onto something out of the box. Shocking. They are awesome. But for something a little different, if you grabbed, say, the base Mac Mini M4, an absurd price to performance ratio, well, Ugreen's dock completely transforms it, because you can add up to an 8TB NVMe storage card via a 10GB enclosure. You get 3 USB-As, 2 USB-Cs, SD and TF slots, and HDMI. Which all means that that base 256GB suddenly isn't a compromise. And the dock fits the Mac Mini perfectly, keeping everything clean, but massively expanding your connectivity. That's 2 products that solve real problems and dodge the Apple tax whilst being better. And with Ugreen's up to 40% off sale that's happening right now, these are practical gifts that will actually get daily use. And you can check out the links down in the video description, and I think you should do that before the current sale ends. It all started with a blog post. Hypixel server founders Simon and Philippe repurchased the IP from Riot, who wanted, quote, what's best for players, and they decided that that basically meant letting the game go to somebody else for development. It seems a genuinely good faith situation, especially in a world where they could have just hoarded the IP, which so many companies do. And we actually know that Riot had multiple offers for the game, but ultimately they liked Simon's pitch the best. Now, this has been in the works for a while. Simon started talking about stepping in to do something about this mere days after the cancellation. He was basically just responding to fans, asking if he could help, and, well, it now seems that plan is actually in action. And what that materially means is that Hypixel has rehired 30 former developers over the last few weeks, and they've secured 10 years of funding from Simon and Philippe directly. And that is the wild thing. There are no external investors, no publishers, no outside pressure to ship before the game is ready. Basically, those guys have done well for themselves. They have a lot of money, and this is how they've chosen to deploy it. Which is nice, you know? Beats a yacht. Anyway, they announced this stuff even before they set a price on the game, which I think does kind of tell you something about their priorities. Though, in their own words, they just say, quote, "We're building something that lasts." Now, how they're building that? Well, that has been the kind of wild part here. So what they've been doing is collecting assets and data that Riot delivered to them, and they've been exploring what they basically have to work with. But what they ultimately found out is that to move forward, they basically had to throw out 4 years of work. And that's 4 years that, you know, cost Riot something around 50 million. Alright, so the last 4 years of Hytale development were focusing on the complete engine replacement, and that's work that the former staff described as, quote, "going in circles until it dies." Yeah, it must have been a cheery time. Now, the goal was big Riot quality full release with cross-platform support, so all the consoles, PC, and mobile, all working together, but obviously that has been left behind. I suppose you could almost think about the differences between original Java Minecraft and Minecraft Bedrock, which is the big multi-plat one. Anyway, this new engine is not a priority. The crossplay is not a priority. This is basically going to be a PC game. So that's why they've decided to, quote, "make a great game first rather than a perfect engine." So they're tossing out all of that rewrite stuff and returning to what they had before. Now, for a bit of context here, Simon left whenever Riot acquired the studio in 2020, which does mean that he wasn't around for the years of toil that ultimately killed Hytale. And now he's dug out this old pre-technical reboot version and has a wild enough plan, which put simply is to rebuild the team, to take a lot of feature prototypes that existed back years ago, but were all just kind of like in different development forks, and basically to then merge them all to main. Yeah, if you're a developer, I'm sure you can imagine how lovely their GitHub looks right now. It must be a busy time. Now, it's going to be true early access, right? So it will be very rough. I'll get into the details shortly, but what that does mean for you, though, is a lot more simple. The original vision, before it got absolutely grand and crazy, and one that is realized by a bunch of the original people alongside the community that ultimately just wanted to play Hytale, probably weren't that concerned about Riot's grand multi-platform vision. Now, in terms of what we're getting, they are being blunt. It's going to be raw, unfinished, and sometimes broken, but with incredible potential. That basically means placeholder content, unbalanced systems, frustrating bugs, but also little moments of magic and glimpses into what it ultimately could become. And we now know that soon you'll be able to pay upwards of $20 for early access to a Windows-only version of the game, for something that Simon calls unfinished, running on a build from over 4 years ago. So, what will you actually get? What will you be able to play? In the first release, players are going to get exploration mode, creative mode, and modding tools, and that's all with years of early access being planned, with mini-games and the campaign coming later. Content-wise, though, it's a simple start. There's going to be 4 zones, as many NPCs and mobs as they can basically get working by launch, and modding that will be rough, but functional. We're currently not satisfied with the state of modding in Hytale. That is a direct quote from their blog, and I think it gives you a little bit of just color to this story. And repeatedly across all of the communications, they've just been saying that everything will have rough edges. NPCs, tools, systems, all of it. But of course, that's also why players are going to be key to the future. They basically need people to play the early access, to make mods, and most importantly, quote, "be patient when things break and trust the long-term vision." And this is where I'll say there's something real important that I think from the player perspective, people should understand. Yes, in an ideal world, you just get the game perfect day one. But for a game like this that's heavily based in creation and heavily based on mods, well, you can have your own sort of features planned out, your own product requirements. But one of the best ways to actually get real product requirements that are like market validated, that you can actually trust, well, that's by having real people play it. and listening to what they like, listening to what they want. So that's why, even though I probably wouldn't recommend the average person to buy it on launch, I do think it's very good that they are doing it this way. Even though obviously in 2025, asking people to pay some money for something that's broken is a hard enough sell, because early access has just become a bit of a shorthand for pay now and maybe get a game later. But that's where I think things are a little bit different here. We've got that personal funding commitment from two people who, from at least what I've been able to gather, are fairly wealthy, but also, I think, a rapid enough pace of development. Here's a cute example of that. The team revealed that dinosaurs existed in the game. 3 hours later, they had built a mod to allow you to ride the dinosaurs, they'd recorded footage of it, and they had posted it. That's pretty quick, right? That's development velocity. And in a world where you are going directly via early access to your players on one platform, yeah, you can just push it to main and move way, way faster. So a healthy development environment, I would say. And of course, one enabled by the toolset that they've made. Because remember, before all of this Hytale stuff, they were humongous Minecraft modders and custom server operators. But more than anything, there's a vibe that I want to get across, and that's the earnestness, the demands to be held accountable, the transparency about picking up the pieces and putting them back together. I think that may just be the greatest factor for their success here. It's personable, right? I even feel like as an onlooker, I'm also part of the journey. I love that far more than what I can see Riot's perfectly polished version of this game that may have came out in a decade would have been. But obviously, earnestness and good vibes does not pay salaries. So, how do you fund 10 years of development with no investors? Because yeah, Simon and Philippe are wealthy boys, but you're going to need more than that. Here's what I think makes the prospect of 10 years with no investors actually extremely optimistic, and it's fairly simple. Hypixel already knows how to build a creator economy. I think this is the most important thing to grasp here. You see, on their Minecraft server, they've ran a support a creator program for years that's paid out $3 million to around a dozen creators through revenue share and sales. Now what they're doing is breaking that model to Hytale, where YouTubers and modders will get unique codes, and then sales through those codes will mean revenue share. Now, the way they're going to do this is that they'll take 0% from modders and server operators for the first 2 years, which, I mean, is exactly what you would want, considering early access seems like it will be fairly rough. Also, the existing Hypixel creators can just carry their codes over, but they're also being quite explicit in opening the program to smaller voices, not just big mega channels. And this is basically goddamn genius. You see, a lot of people could cover Hytale every now and then, but what you want is your own homegrown talent. Now, there's a problem with that. If Hytale is a rough early access game that doesn't have humongous, consistent, say, YouTube views, then that would mean that smaller voices wouldn't be able to financially support themselves while covering the game. But in doing something like this, and basically making that economically viable, it would mean that people can, yes, play Hytale, but also have an ecosystem of creators making content that allows them to keep up to date with the game and the project. So for something that, like Hytale, is in early access and very much will be a long burn, that's just goddamn smart. Now, of course, for the modding side, this all does matter because Hytale's toolset is just incredible seeming. They've talked about neat things like being able to edit everything live, stuff like dig speeds, crafting recipes, loot tables, just being able to change all that and play around with it and test designs without even having to reboot the game, right? Iterating mid-play, testing changes instantly. That's amazing. And if modders can get paid for it, and same for server operators, that does actually matter. Now, obviously I know there's Bethesda paid mods, right? And a lot of people will look at that and think, oh dear. Though, I would say that here, I think it does matter. Just like how YouTube ads means that, say, we can get paid and therefore can fund, lots of research and video creation to help keep you guys up to date, well, something like this would eventually allow for actual professional development teams to make content, to make mods for Hytale, which funnily enough is just like what Hypixel server was to the original Minecraft. Just that unlike with Minecraft, the modding toolset is deeply part of their development plan, and it has been since the start because they themselves are modders and developers. It's a tested revenue share model, and it's now one that's being applied to a game that is built from the ground up for user-generated content, and by a team that's done it before. That sounds damn good to me. But at the risk of stating the obvious, calling this a success before the damn thing is even launched into early access would be kind of silly. What we can instead do is think, Does this version of Hytale have a better shot than Riot's? I want you to imagine a world where Riot just continued funding the project. Now, in contrast, I think Hytale surviving like this actually gives it a better shot than the Riot version, even including the rough edges. Because if it had have released, as planned, the Riot way, probably years from now, then yes, it would have been a polished product, built to Riot standards, with more than a decade of expectations placed on it, and as good as it could have been, I think those expectations would have killed it. And it would have been built on assumptions. You wouldn't have real paying players with skin in the game playing it early, and that would mean that, well, Riot wouldn't really know what true market-tested kind of like requirements for the game would be, because they'd just be cooking it internally. So this will be rough, but damn, I think it is almost certainly going to be better than what we would have got. And then there's the thing Riot simply never could have provided, and that is a good underdog story, a good resurrection story. You see, it's a perfect way to harness just how foobar this game got, and it actually changes what and how Hytale actually needs to deliver. This take in Hytale is inoculated against certain types of criticism. What do I mean by that? Well, it's pretty simple. It's not had 10 years of development, right? People know it hasn't had 10 years. They know that internally, it's basically just the team gluing a bunch of shit from the past together. And that means that expectations are managed, that Hypixel doesn't have to deliver that Riot polish, because players are just not expecting Riot polish. And even better, players now get to ride the wave of enthusiasm that comes from resurrecting a dead game. And that is, I think, the best way to get superfans. Because the people who buy and play in day one will be superfans. They'll be the goddamn vanguard, the people who will make the mods, the people who will tell their friends. And in building them into the game's story, I think they just have an asset that the likes of Riot could simply never have. And realistically, that energy may be exactly what Hytale needed to become what it was always supposed to be. Hell of a story, guys. I hope this one goes well. I want another win, and we all love an underdog comeback story. And speaking of underdog stories, well, Stop Killing Games made it into UK Parliament. It didn't go exactly as many people would have wanted, but actually quite a few good things happened, and you can learn all about it in this video next.